Welcome to the ARISTEiA podcast, where experts talk about excellence. In today's podcasts, we're pleased to have Dr. Effy Vayena, Professor of Bioethics, Associate Vice President for Digital Transformation and Governance at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, ETH, in Zurich. She is a member of the Swiss Academy of Medical Science. And Dr. Constantine Dovrolis, Professor and Director of Center for Computational Science and Technology at the Cyprus Institute and Professor at the School of Computer Science at Georgia Institute of Technology.
My name is Effy Vayena. I'm a professor of bioethics at ETH in Zurich. And I have come to Zurich and to ETH via a rather long route from Greece, from UK at Imperial College, then the US, University of Minnesota, Harvard University, then back to Switzerland, University of Zurich, and finally at ETH. So a long trip, different disciplines and different training that led me to what I do now, which is research in the ethics and ethical social issues that relate to emerging technologies. So I've worked a lot actually on the ethics of genomics, and then eventually through the ethical issues with data, I moved on to start thinking about how we use the various analytics, and then AI in health data. And in the medical context, in the context of biotechnology, and anyone who works on that inevitably shifts a little bit towards the bigger discussion about AI and ethics more broadly. And eventually then after that, I had and I still have another role at my university. I have the role of Associate Vice President for Digital Transformation and Governance. And the operative word is governance because that's where actually my own expertise seems to be more fitting.
Great, thank you, Effy, and many thanks to ARISTEiA, the organizers of this podcast, to Konstantinos Drosatos. It's very nice to meet you, Effy. So my name is Constantine or Konstantinos Dovrolis. I was born in Drama about 50 years ago. And then I studied in Crete in computer engineering. And then I went to the US for graduate studies, mostly at the University of Wisconsin. I've been a professor at Georgia Tech in Atlanta for about 20 years now. Recently, about 2-3 years ago, I decided that I want to come back closer to our homeland, right? I came to Cyprus. I love Cyprus. I think of Cyprus as part of the broader, Hellenic world. I'm a director here of a research center at the Cyprus Institute. The research center focuses on computational science and technology, and my research area is AI, especially something that we refer to as neuro-inspired AI. So we spend a lot of time looking at computational neuroscience, and we try to understand how the brain works so that we can transfer some of those ideas in the design of new AI algorithms. How to make AI learn faster, how to make AI be smarter, how to have AI that is more aligned with human values. The fascination behind AI, of course, there are many practical applications, but I think deep inside, if you ask every AI expert, every researcher in AI, they will tell you that they are really fascinated with human intelligence. And, if you're an engineer, the best way you can understand something is by trying to build it yourself. So this may sound, very arrogant, of course, but behind AI research, there is this fascination with humanity and with human intelligence. And we really try to understand that, first of all.
So that's well, that's exciting. Trying to understand human intelligence, right? And as you said, you try to understand it so you can build something that maybe performs, or hopefully performs, equally well, or even better, depending on the aspiration, I guess. But that's exactly where I think it gets interesting, right? When you set this target of how well something is going to perform, an AI system, an algorithm that you're building. And so how do you think, since you are in the making of those things, right? You set those goals yourself and you lead groups that do that. How do you think about your kind of like own personal responsibility in even achieving that? There's something that it works as good as, whatever you define human intelligence, or in other words, do you think you should just operate within certain boundaries that somebody else has set? How
Yeah,
are you guys doing that kind of thinking, or is this thinking part of your daily activity?
I think that especially when we talk about AI, it needs to be part of our everyday thinking, right? Because this is not just a tool, it's actually something that can have agency. We are moving towards AI systems that have agency. And so if we don't think about ethics, it can be even more dangerous than, designing nuclear bombs. I have to say, I give a lot of responsibility to developers to come up with very rigorous methods to test what they create. But I don't want to put the responsibility only to developers. I think we also have to look at, governments and regulators in the same way that for everything else, like the airplanes that we fly on, the cars that we drive, the medicines that we take, for everything, there are regulators and policies and constraints, right? What you can do, what you cannot do. Something like that will have to exist also for AI. And also, and I don't want to surprise you now, but I think that responsibility is also for the users, right? Um, I mean, I can give you a perfectly safe car, and if you drive recklessly or if you are drunk, you can make that car very, very dangerous, right? Um, the same is true for AI. So users have to be aware of what they can do and what they should not.
And I'm thinking that in the case of cars, I feel that we had time, historically speaking, right, to kind of adapt to what is safe, what's not, what happens when you drive so fast or not, to, have seatbelts before we didn't have them. So there was some more time to get used to the risks, the benefits, to the changing standards. And my feeling with social media, for example, if you think of social media, we jumped on this as a society. Kids jumped on those things. We are now seeing the problems that some of those that fast adoption. Well, it was faster than the cars adoption, I guess, but it wasn't still as fast as we've seen the adoption or alleged adoption of ChatGPT, where like it just gained traction so quickly because of the infrastructure, because different factors that affect adoption. So I think, and what I'm thinking is when even trying to define responsibility, whether it's on the developer or on the user or on an institution, there is not only the pressure of competition, there is the pressure of time, right? Things happen so fast that all of these ways we used to have to kind of like deal with scientific developments or technological advances as a society, they don't really work as well because things happen at a completely different pace and at a completely different scale. Like you would have to have built roads first to have cars. So in some places we know very well the roads are not very good for cars, but the infrastructure we have now allows for a different kind of scale. So many more people are simultaneously or quickly affected by certain things. And so my own feeling is that as we're trying to figure out what this responsibility is and who bears responsibility, and I like your thought of like we all have responsibility in this world, right? You cannot just say it's just you that you gave me the something. I also have some responsibility to look at what that the it is, why I use it for, and also collectively institutions that put some boundaries that are looking after maybe the broader good of our world. But I feel under pressure to define this responsibility before even I allocate it to or distribute it to those who have to take it. It's almost stressful, I feel, to get this thing right. At least from those of us who are not building the technology, but are like studying or thinking about that.
It's very stressful indeed. Let me ask you something. I mean, you talked about the effect of time, that things are moving very fast and the scale. I mean, I want to ask a different question. So you are a bioethicist, right? And I'm wondering, like, given that we live in a world with many different cultures, values, humans are not the same everywhere. And so can we actually expect that we would ever have a single global set of ethical guidelines, right, for governing AI, something that would be common across the entire humanity? Is this even a reasonable thing to expect to have? Or should we think about it differently?
Okay, that's actually a very good question that I think in people in my field has appeared before with other technologies, not just with AI. We've been thinking about stuff like that for synthetic biology, for example, or other things that came before, right? And so the answer is that in our global world, different cultures and different societies may have variation on their values, and certainly on how they practice those values. But we also know that humans across the board have certain things that are common. So one attempt to kind of figure out this commonality when it comes to values and principles was human rights. We all agree that human rights are for all humans. And actually, we went as far as to even, create legally bounding instruments that are based on those commonalities of what humans are, what needs they have, what basic rights they may have. So that gives me hope that even if we're very different in our cultures, there are certain things that really matter to us all in the same way. And so from that, we also know that some values, like, for example, the value of a human, the value of freedom, the pain of pain, all of these things, also some virtues like kindness, for example, are things that we share. And sociologists have shown that to us, philosophers have debated that. But where we're different is how sometimes we articulate these values in different societies. This depends on context, this depends on practices. And so there, I think we have one difference that it's harder to reconcile. The second thing, I think, is cultures evolve in different ways. And so again, there are some cultures maybe due to different exposures converge towards certain practices and others diverge from those practices. So the hopeful thing for me also in AI is that if we go at the level of basic principles that are common amongst us, and these include how we want to respect human rights across the board, I think we can find common ground, but I do think that we will have variations on how we articulate them. And that's why I think, agreeing on sort of the more basic things is important, and then kind of work, fight it out essentially, and fight it out not in a fighting mode, but, working with others to figure out what benefits us all amongst those variations. So for me, that is That's how I imagine it. And to tell you the truth, the fact that we are a pluralistic world, maybe it's good to have some of these variations, because it's hard to believe that somebody has the monopoly on truth, right? So maybe an approach that it's somewhere else in terms of how we practice certain things might be something we over here have to look at and explain or work out. So in that sense, I think agreement on the basic principles, rooted and driven by what we have already agreed upon, which is protection of human rights, and there we have made some progress. Allowing for more variability in practice, I think that that would work. And I was recently looking at some data that actually made me think also about that question. If you look today at, it was published, I think recently, it was the University of Melbourne and KPMG together. They did a survey looking, you might have seen it, whether people believe AI is trustworthy, reliable, and ethically practiced. And it was a real difference between high-income countries and low and middle-income countries. People in low and middle-income countries, they had more trust in AI. Higher impact country, higher income countries, they had less. And I was thinking, like, why? I mean, we're actually in higher income countries more exposed to technology, more, perhaps stronger systems of regulation. We need sociologists to analyze this, but I think context matters, right? They have maybe more to gain and less to lose in that game than perhaps that we live in affluent societies. We have our rights protected. We have, prosperity in many places. So it was interesting to me to see such a striking difference here in that question of trust and the ethics of technology between those two groups of countries that have distinct differences in terms of things that we know, right? Low and middle income versus high income. So that's
right.
You can't avoid that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and I think something similar is happening with different age groups. How younger people react to AI versus older people and so on.
Yeah, but so actually, turning it back a little to these questions of ethics. Let's say we agree. If we look at what kind of things we agree on, like we agree on human rights, we agree on these basic principles. If you look at the literature around how should we think about the ethics of AI, one thing that keeps coming up in most of the documents we're seeing, and I am one of those people who have actually tried to analyze various guidelines to see where they agree, if they agree on something, and where they converge, when they diverge. It seems that the being able to understand or explain, rather to explain how an AI system has come to a certain decision is what everybody's asking for. Like as if that were a very, very important thing in order to be transparent, in order to be able to, allocate responsibility. And so for many, it's even a shortcut to ethics. If your AI is explainable, then tick the box, you're ethical, which I want to ask your opinion a little bit. Is this explainability discussion fair and advancing? And second, do you think, is it enough to have explainable AI in order to be ethical?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think of transparency, right? To be able to know what's happening inside your machine learning model, and explainability, to be able to understand why it actually chose to act or say something. They're both very important, but they are definitely not enough to say that we have AI that is ethical, or that it is aligned with human values. And it's very easy to think about extreme examples. Imagine something that is completely transparent and completely explainable, always saying the most biased things, and being harmful to people, right? I mean, we can easily think of such AI tools. So clearly we need something more. And you mentioned earlier that you like to read a lot of these documents and try to understand if the community of AI experts has converged in some sense into some requirements, right, for ethical AI. And I think I will disappoint you. I mean, I feel that as a community, we don't really know what we are asking for. We don't really know which are these fundamental properties. One, two, three, maybe there are 10, I don't know. That if we check those 10 boxes, we will have something that, provably or almost probably can be considered ethical, right? And we get into very interdisciplinary type of questions that, quite frankly, I'm not sure that we as AI people know how to answer. And maybe we're getting into some territory where there is no real solution. Like maybe there is no way to actually prove that something that you build will be ethical, right? According to some given definition of what ethical means. So there are lots of open questions here, and there are no answers, and the technology is definitely moving faster than this discussion. Certain things, I mean, you talked about explainability, transparency. The reason that you see them being brought up and discussed so much is because for them, we can actually have technical, discussions, and we can have mathematics, and we can prove that something maybe is explainable but so we tend, of course, as scientists, every scientist likes to do that, right? You tend to gravitate towards things for which you can actually give concrete answers. But those answers may not be what is actually needed. I think your question is fundamental. How do I know that this AI is ethical? Well, I don't think we know at this point how to answer that question.
I like that very honest answer from on your part because there is also, I'm seeing this tendency to what I call checklist ethics, where you think that if you tick the box for something, you can sort of give the kind of guarantee that this is ethical. And as I think very, very correctly, I agree with you, say that you may have a mathematical proof that something is accurate, but whether that means that the impact that this whatever prediction might have on a person in a particular situation, in a particular setting, is the ethical thing to do. I think that's it's a much more complex discussion, and I do think that it's for all of us that are thinking about this stuff in this area. You mentioned interdisciplinary stuff. It's quite challenging, but at the same time I don't know if one discipline would be able to solve this question.
I have a question for you, actually, Effy, about exactly this point, right? In your experience, in your expertise, who are the different communities that should be working on this goal of creating ethical guidelines for AI? I mean, you're thinking about scientists, what kind of scientists, policymakers, maybe the public can also participate. So, and if you have such diverse groups of people, how would you handle all the disagreements among them? Clearly, they will be looking at this in a very different way.
So, I don't think one discipline can solve this. So you may, as a computer scientist, are able to develop algorithms that perform extremely well, that you can debias your data, you can run various things, tests that show performance. But I think if we were to understand this bigger question we were talking about, is this done ethically? I feel that the engineers and the scientists are part of this conversation. They actually understand the doing of things a lot better than anybody else. I think the social scientists should be in. They understand and they can tell us how societies work and how they have done in the past or in the future. I think the philosophers should be in. They ask these kind of different critical questions. You said in the beginning that we're closer to this, that AI may have agency. I mean, the very question of do we want a technology that has agency as a goal, that is a deeply fundamental question, and has less to do with whether we can achieve it or not. It's do we really, really want that kind of agency in a technology? So these are questions that I think we need those different specialists to come into. And I feel also, you mentioned citizens and publics. I think publics matter a lot, especially as we sometimes in our disciplinary worlds, we don't know what people think about our stuff. We do them, we feel great about them, and we get citations. And then people out there have to deal with consequences of that work, but we haven't understood what they want or what kind of concerns. I mean, in the area that I've worked on, health and medicine, patients' views, for example, or their involvement is critical, but we ignored them for many, many years. And we have slowly discovered the value they have even in the kinds of scientific questions we ask. So definitely that. But you pointed out to the challenge, like how do you bring all these people together? How do they work together? I think interdisciplinarity in terms of our scientific world, we know how challenging it is to get different people in one room and have them even use the same language. That is a problem. But that's precisely, I think, what the times require. The effort and the innovation in how we do these kinds of thinking. There's a really interesting example in Taiwan, for example, where they try to do precisely that, engage their publics into how we regulate artificial intelligence. And they did it online in sort of various forms. That's interesting and innovative. Maybe it cannot work everywhere, but I think there are modalities that can give us this opportunity to listen from one another and answer these more fundamental questions. It's not easy. We might have to agree to disagree on certain things, but we might also, through this deliberation, be able to sandpaper some of our corners and be able to find some common ground. Perhaps we agree that, that pace or the other pace or something else is not the way forward. Doing this, I think, at a global scale is very difficult, but we can do this in small, kind of, in regional or even in the world of science, we can do that at a global level in different ways. So I believe it's doable, and I believe it's a goal we have to set. I don't think we have set that goal so far. I come from a space where in medicine, where we test everything rigorously before letting them out to the clinics or to the people. Do you think that's something, and we test it for performance and accuracy, but we also sometimes test it for ethics, right? We have a certain process for doing that. Bioethics has been a bit older than technoethics, for example, which is the newer thing. But do you think one could imagine something like this for AI?
I mean, that's a tempting idea that somehow we can apply the same protocols and methods, say for medical treatments, how you test new drugs, or we can look at other industries, right? We can maybe think about how airplanes are checked for safety, or cars. These are tempting ideas, but I think they are ignoring the fact that with AI, you have a technology that is basically evolving with time. I mean, the same model can actually learn over time. So even if I check my model, say, GPT 4.5 today, Of course, GPT 4.5, is not really uh, learning additional knowledge over time, but the next generation of these models that we are actually also working on will be able to do what is called lifelong learning. So the model will be changing over time. So even if you guarantee that it is ethical or safe today, it may not be safe tomorrow. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that I think we need to think outside the box. I don't think we can just copy what another industry is doing. Let me give you an example of something that we could do potentially. When you raise children, you know that there will be a time period in which they will grow and change dramatically, and when they're teenagers, they will do crazy things, and you hope that maybe by the time they become adults, they will be more mature, right? So you have some time period for the model to evolve and grow and learn, and then you think, okay, now I can give to my child the keys for driving the car. Maybe something similar should happen with AI models to kind of have them essentially operating in some very sheltered and well-controlled environment for some time, interacting with people, but again, in a very sheltered environment, before we can say, okay, now my model is mature enough to actually go out and work in the real world.
Overall, are you optimistic about the future of AI?
I am fascinated. I think that I feel very fortunate that we are alive at this point in time. I feel that what's happening has not happened for many, many decades. It's the first time in the history of humanity that we can create things that maybe are equally smart with us and that can have agency. I don't think we can control that, by the way. I don't think we can turn it off. It's kind of in our nature to always explore and always move forward and always try new things. So I'm fascinated. I don't know if I would call myself optimistic. It's like watching an action movie and you don't know if the next scene will be good or bad, but you're glad that you are actually not just watching the movie, you are playing in that movie. Let me ask you, I don't know if we have time, maybe we have time for one more question. So basically, in your opinion, if we would create a global guidebook, right, for AI behavior, what's the single most important rule or principle it should contain, in your opinion?
For me, it's actually fairly simple. I think it has to have this respect for the human, and respect is a broad word for me. A lot of the things that we do around it's because of this kind of respect that humans and what we owe to one another is fundamental. We, for example, think about privacy. We think about accountability. We do all these things because of this basic respect we have for each one of us in our species. So that would be what I wanted to make sure that it is in the rule book, and how we articulate this. And in practice, I think it would vary and it would have to evolve. And that's what has happened in our history already. We had in various cases less respect that we wanted for, but what we want to maintain is that basic respect for humans, for each one of us.
I very much agree with you. I suggest that maybe we move to the end, right? And I think I have a funny question for you, which is, in a perfect scenario, who would you invite for dinner, living or deceased? Where would it take place? And what song would you actually play in the background?
Okay, so I mean the where is kind of easy, obviously, for us Greeks. I think I would invite that person to Greece. I have an island that I really love. It would have to be an island. I do come from an island, but I would in that case not invite in my own island, in my own like in my birthplace. But actually, I love Patmos. I think it is a beautiful island for all kinds of conversations and for inspiration. And there is a person who is deceased, but I have admired her work. The person is Hannah Arendt. She's a philosopher, but she wrote about our individual responsibility in general and how this plays out in our collective responsibility. And I would have loved to discuss with her how would she sees that kind of individual, collective, the power structures in the technological age that we live in. I mean, she lived earlier, not very long ago, but definitely not in where AI and all this kind of the fancy technologies were out. I would have loved that. And I think in terms of music, I don't know if I would play this the whole night, but I think at least I would start with one with David Bowie with Space Oddity, which I think it has a beautiful tone. And I think it just, to me, it's a music and a song about, looking at Earth, being out there. It has this ground control to Major Tom. So ground control is also good. I think that combination would, it's a bit of a weird combination, bringing Hannah Arendt and playing David Bowie, but I think it's something that I would, since you let me imagine whatever I want to do, then I would do that. But then what would you do? Where would you bring people? Somebody, and who would be that somebody?
By the way, I loved your answer previously, but do you know Alan Turing? Alan
Yes.
Turing, is considered, of course, the father of computer science. He lived in the first half of the 20th century. He did both foundational work for computer science. He asked some fundamental questions about AI. How would you tell if you are interacting with a human or with an AI if you only use text, right? The so-called Turing test.
Yeah.
So I would love to take him and go to a computer room. Okay, the computer room
That's
can
not
be
that's not a dinner venue, I'm
wait.
afraid.
I don't know if it is, but it can be a computer room at a Greek island with a little taverna outside
Okay.
by the beach. But I would take him to a computer room and ask him to play with ChatGPT, and I would really love
Okay.
to watch his face and of course, at the background, we would hear, we would listen to Imagine by John
Yeah.
Lennon.
That sounds good. Fantastic. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
So, Effy, I want to thank you very much. I mean, it was great talking with you, and I hope that we will have the chance to continue our conversation in person next time. And I'm very grateful to the ARISTEiA Institute, for organizing this discussion. It was really great. Thank you.
Thank you for the conversation. It's always great to speak with somebody who does the stuff I kind of think about. So thank you for the input and the insights, and of course thank you, ARISTEiA and Konstantinos Drosatos for the invitation. That was great. Thank you very much.
A huge thank you to Dr. Effy Vayena and Dr. Constantine Dovrolis for this podcast, ARISTEiA in 30 minutes, where experts talk about excellence.